What's up, everyone? This is LeetCode 56, merge intervals. I recommend doing insert intervals. That's another problem, because that problem also is an interval problem, and it's not exactly like this one, but it is another interval problem. So if you want more practice with intervals, definitely check that one out too. Okay, so this problem though, we're given an array of intervals, right? We're given a start point and end point, and we have to merge all the intervals that overlap. Sounds easy enough, right? But there are edge cases we have to handle, which is kind of the tricky part of this problem. Now, I want to discuss something really important before we even do anything, which is that don't ever make assumptions about your inputs, right? So what I mean by this is our inputs right now, right? They seem to be sorted. But should we always assume that just because they give us these two examples? No, we shouldn't. Because a lot of times when they are sorted, it'll tell us like down here, or it'll tell you in the problem statement. You can assume that all the inputs are sorted. So don't ever make assumptions because it's going to cause you problems in the future, right? So unless it'll tell you that it's sorted, don't always assume the worst case scenario. So just because it's the start times are sorted, don't ever assume that you can't be given an interval like 2, 3 and like 0, 4, right? So don't ever make that assumption. So first of all, before we do anything, let's sort this, okay? And then we can actually start to handle this problem. Okay, so again, don't ever make assumptions about inputs like that they're sorted or not unless it's explicitly telling you. So we have intervals that overlap and we have to merge them. Okay, so let's go to this illustration up here. Okay, so the blue ones are our inputs, right? And our output should look like this. I don't know what color this is, like a peach color or something. So our inputs are blue, right? And you can see here we have some overlap, right? There's overlap here, and these don't overlap. So what do we do in this case? Well, how would we know that they overlap when we're only given the points, right? Well, we know that this 2 is less than this 3, right? The end point of this 3 is greater than the start point of this. So we know that there's some overlap here. Okay, so what do we do in that case? How do we merge them? Well, why don't we basically set this as one interval where the start point here is the start point, and then the maximum between these two is the endpoint, okay? The reason we have to do the endpoint is because technically, even though this 2 is less than this 3, technically this point could be like over here or something, in which case we would want this to be our endpoint for the merge. Okay, so we have to take the maximum between this and this. Okay, so that's one case, right? But we have edge cases also. Like, how do we handle these intervals? Because the 0th index and the last index, they are kind of like special edge cases because, right, the 0th index, there's nothing before that. The last index, there's nothing after that, right? Why don't we start off basically by taking the first input? We always want to check the current interval we're on with the one behind us, right? And handle that accordingly. So why don't we set the 0th index, right, the first interval, as a previous interval, and then let's actually start at the first index in the intervals array. Okay, so we're going to start here, but this is initially going to be in a variable called previous. Okay, so let's do that. So we're going to say previous is equal to intervals 0. Okay, now if you want to get the start point, you would do 0, 1 for the endpoint, but we want to set the whole interval, obviously, so we're not going to do that. But to get the start and the endpoint, I'm just going to use variables rather than actual numbers. Oops, there should be a 0. Right, and we need an array for our output called answer. We're going to return this down here. Okay, so we're going to say for I in range. And again, we don't want to start at the... or we're going to say for interval in intervals of... Basically, skip from the first index onwards. So that's inclusive, right? So what we're doing is we're basically taking the 0th index in the intervals array, setting that, right, storing that in previous, so that, and then we're iterating basically our for loop starting here forward, okay? So that at every step we can compare what we're on to the previous element, or this previous variable, I should say, okay? So how do we compare? Okay, remember what I said? We want to check is the current start point for the interval we're on less than or equal to the previous variable's endpoint. And let me just explain this, by the way. We have to do less than or equal to because if this 3 actually was here, for example, it was 1 to 2, it's still an overlap. So if they're equal, there's still an overlap, and we have to merge them still, okay? So anyways, so the current interval we're on, right, is that start point less than or equal to the previous variable's endpoint, okay? So we're going to say if interval start is less than or equal to previous end, right? What do we have to do if this is the case like this? Well, we have to take the maximum between these two and set previous end as that. So, because this is the previous initially, right? But because there's overlap, we want previous to basically be from here all the way to here, okay? And that's basically our merged interval, okay? So we're going to say previous end is equal to the max between interval end and previous end, okay? Now, if there is, the else statement is where there's no overlap. So what we're going to do, basically, if there's no overlap, like let's say we merge this, okay? So this is the previous now, because we updated it, and now we move on to here. Well, there's no overlap, right? So we don't enter this if statement. So what we're going to do is we're going to take previous, put it into our answer array, and then this interval here is going to be the new previous, okay? So we're going to say previous answer.append previous, and then previous is going to be equal to interval. Okay. Now there is a case which is the last index or last element in the array we have to handle, right? That's what I'm saying that this problem is tricky, is because you have to think about this stuff like these edge cases, and that's kind of the tricky part because you could easily mess up if you don't consider and visualize this. So this is in our answer array, right? And this is our new previous. So when we move here, we enter the else statement, right? Because there's no overlap. So this goes into our answer array also, and this is our new previous. However, when we exit, there's nothing left to check, right? So there's nothing to check, so we exit the for loop basically. And we never added this to answer, right? So we actually have to do that, right? Otherwise, we're not going to have a proper merged output. Because we're missing an interval, right? So we're going to say answer.append previous. And you may be thinking, wait, is there an edge case where we don't want to do that though? Like if we have an overlap somewhere, right? So if we have something like this, right, where the last element is not by itself, but it's overlapped, I'm going to show you what's going to happen, right? So we're going to do this overlap here, right? So this gets put into answer, right? Because it will not overlap with this. So this is previous, right? Now we're going to move here, and there's overlap, right? So we set this as a new previous, in the if statement. However, we never append it, right? So we actually do have to append it because we never append in the if statement, right, when they overlap. So as you can see, in either case, regardless of whether the last element is overlapping with something or not, we still have to append it here, right? No matter the case, right? So we can say either we merge or don't. Either we merge and don't append quite yet, or append but set the last one as previous and not append it. In either case, we have an interval to append still, right? Okay. If this runs, it does. And problems like this, like the tricky part with problems like this is like you don't want to like, especially in an interview, if you can, you don't want to try and visualize this all in your head. It's going to trip you up. I don't know why I have two answers. My bad. I'm returning two answers. I mean, you would return here anyway, so you wouldn't hit this return anyways, but it doesn't matter. But my bad. But anyways, the tricky part with this problem is like you don't want to visualize all this in your head because it's going to trip you up. Hopefully, if you get this in an interview, your interviewer is nice and they let you use like some drawing tool so you can kind of explain your thought process. But if they don't, I mean, you could just do something like this. When I was working on this problem, is what I did. Just draw it like a number like this, right? And I just did like dot underscore underscore, boom. Then I had like another one where I was like, okay, this is the other one, right? And then down here, I'm like, okay, this is what the merged list should look like. And I was like, okay, in what conditions would we merge and handle the different edge cases, right? So you don't want to try and visualize this all in your head, because you're gonna mess up. Kind of like the permutations problem we did. Also, it's kind of like that. Like you want to visualize the call stack and stuff. We don't have a call stack here, but you get my point. Like there are certain problems where you do want to draw it out. Okay, so don't forget that it's very useful. But anyways, I hope this helped, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.